get into this. The big story in terms of impeachment, and as we speak, I think today is, if I'm not mistaken, is Alan Dershowitz.
Yes.
He's going to get up for an hour, and he is going to talk about how the Constitution says you cannot impeach a president for abuse of power. And, of course, it's completely contrary to what he said in the past. He's pretending he's not working for the president. He is. This is Alan Dershowitz doing his best to keep at arm's length. But meanwhile, this story about it's the John Bolton thing that is going to make this difference. I mean, from the beginning, I have never thought that Donald Trump could be thrown out of office unless there was actual video of him naked running around the front lawn of the White House chasing a small boy. That is the only circumstance where I believe that it is possible for him not only to be impeached, he has been impeached now, but impeached and removed from office.
He hired Alan Dershowitz just in case he needed to be protected from chasing a small boy.
It's a twofer.
Yes.
Yeah, even then they'd probably find a way to rationalize it.
I think it would be close. I think it would be close, but it depends on how explicit the video is. If it was grainy in any way, I think you're right. Fake news. But the real issue in terms of impeachment are a half a dozen senators, Tom Tillis, both the senators in Georgia, particularly the new one, Joni Ernst, Martha McSally, I said it right, finally. Obviously, Susan Collins, Cory Gardner. I think, who else do we have? Joni Ernst, Tom Tillis. I mean, those are the big ones right there. Tom Tillis is polling poorly against his rival. Susan Collins is in deep trouble. Cory Gardner is in deep trouble. Joni Ernst may be having some problems. Martha McSally is going to have some problems, I think. Those folks in Georgia could very well have some problems. We just lost the progressive challenger in that race, sadly, in the primary for lack of funding. But
It's crazy.
This is going to make it even harder.
Right.
Because apparently John Bolton's book, the publisher had announced it's coming out March 17th, which is 2 days after most of the filing deadlines for primaries against these senators. They are jammed up. They're going to vote to exonerate the president. That's going to happen no matter what. The real question is, can they afford to vote for witnesses? I think let's listen to what Mitt Romney says here, because Mitt Romney is a guy who is the only one, I think, maybe Lamar Alexander because he's retiring, but
he's so close to Mitch McConnell. But
it's also, here's the other thing that's operative here. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Let's do Mitt Romney.
It's increasingly apparent that it would be important to hear from John Bolton. I, of course, will make a final decision on witnesses after we've heard from not only the prosecution but also the defense. But I think at this stage it's pretty fair to say that John Bolton has a relevant testimony. I think it's increasingly likely that other Republicans will join those of us who think we should hear from John Bolton.
Those of us.
Now, this is interesting because Lamar Alexander, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski's not in danger, but she has a brand to maintain, and she's already had her issues with the Republican Party, right? She went in as a write-in. He has been meeting with them. All they need is 4 votes. And it's quite possible that the witnesses come in. And if the witnesses come in, I think what they're going to do is they're going to put John Bolton behind a closed-door session. They're going to keep his deposition secret.
Right.
They're gonna avoid the whole thing, and that's it. But the problem they have is that John Bolton comes out 3 weeks later, and they can say that he's lying.
Yeah.
But
you mean comes out on TV and just gives his version, or?
yeah, when he's going around with his book.
Yeah.
2 months later, and he's going to say, "This is what I said in those hearings."
Exactly. And he's and what people don't understand about John Bolton, he's crazy.
He's a nut.
He loves TV and just says, if you think Trump's crazy, different kind of crazy.
And let's remember, this guy was all over Fox News.
Right, exactly.
It's going to be very hard to sort of scrub the existence of this guy. But here's the other thing. I think someone like Tom Tillis, I think someone like Joni Ernst, I think someone like maybe even Cory Gardner, although that's arguable, they're not going to vote for witnesses. They're just going to go down with the ship, because if they're looking at a situation where they're going to lose either way,
right?
Because if they abandon Trump, or Trump decides that they didn't do what Trump wants, they're going to attack him and they're going to lose, then they're screwed out of any sort of like post-political or post sort of political entrepreneurial.
Right.
They want to go back and lobby their friends. And if they are, if they're toxic and Donald Trump wins again, they're in big, big trouble.
Well, they can join MSNBC as contributors.
That's the only option that they'll have at that point. But I don't think Tom Tillis, I mean, they would have to completely do a 360 at this point,
right,
or 180. But I mean, isn't that the calculation, do you think, that they're doing? I mean,
I think one factor that plays into this is, McConnell holds the funds too. And so he knows very well that in order to keep the Senate in place, he has to balance out, it's like light pressure. It really does come down to Mitch McConnell and what he's pressuring them to do, and knowing very specifically the polling down to the counties, down to the precincts, where the audiences are, the voters are on this topic. It's not an easy calculus at the end of the day. I mean, he has to appear strong, McConnell. He has to appear like the Republican Party is in unity. I think what you're saying about holding the witnesses behind closed doors is the safe path for him, and the safe path for all of them, including Lamar Alexander, who, of course, is leaving.
It's the least painful.
It's the least painful. And Collins, at the end of the day, as independent as she appears to be, she often votes in line.
Always.
Right.
I mean, always, unless it's completely meaningless.
So why are we even having a conversation about her if
Well, I think the bottom line is just this, is that there is, in all of these states, I don't think they're swing voters in the context necessarily of a presidential election.
Right.
But they want their senator to show a certain amount of independence, which is why they can justify voting for Trump.
That's right.
And they are those conservatives that you may have met that, were sort of maybe Jeb Bush conservatives who listen to NPR and think that they're getting both sides of the story because I'm listening to NPR. And those are the people that I think are going to abandon these Republican senators. They'll still vote for Trump, I think, for the most part.
Isn't that crazy?
But I think the idea is that I want a divided government. I want to make it seem like I'm, so as long as I get my tax cuts, I can still sort of like play this off. I have a feeling, I mean, that's basically who we're talking about. And that's also, I think, why the Democrats have been, and I found it distasteful, frankly, but so not full on jingoistic, but pretty jingoistic in some of their, their approaches to this. The militaristic aspects of Ukraine. But it'll be fascinating to see how they handle this over the next couple of days, because they just destroyed literally dozens of Republican senators' arguments. Like, there's no one who's heard specifically that the president had a quid pro quo. Well,
amazing.
John Bolton and Mick Mulvaney have. In fact, the
March 17th, the book comes out?
The book now, it's just been announced. It's coming out March 17th.
That's 2 months before the Georgia primary. March, April, May. Yeah, May.
Do you think it's going to have any implication in terms of like of the Democratic primary race? I don't see why it would at this
I don't
point.
think so at all. I mean,
unless Joe Biden gets subpoenaed,
right.
because they could subpoena him, 51 votes, and then there's going to be pressure on him to show up, I think.
I mean, that won't affect the primaries for other for Joe Biden, of course, but in terms of Senate races and other races, I don't think it'll affect.
No. So here are the sort of the big, supposedly, at least this is according to the New York Times, and it's unclear who leaked this. The manuscript was sent to the White House to be vetted for stuff that was sensitive, in terms of national security. The lawyer, the Times, the lawyer said that the manuscript was sent there. the Times implies that people have seen different drafts, which are different than the manuscript, right? Like that's not the final version. And so it's unclear where this is coming from. But
did he write this with somebody else? I can't imagine. John
Did he?
Bolton. Yeah, he had a.
I'm sure he had a
Some sort of,
ghostwriter.
yeah.
If it's not, co-credited, I don't know. But apparently it says that one, in an August meeting with Bolton, Trump said he didn't want to release the aid until Ukraine sent all the documents pertaining to Hillary and Biden. Now, here's the thing. This also, we heard the Igor Fruman tape. You start to get the sense that Donald Trump is just an idiot lunatic.
Yeah.
And it's unclear if it depends on what your definition of lying is. But
with intent, with, awareness that he may think he's not breaking the law because he doesn't understand the law.
He doesn't, but which is no defense, but it's more like you can hear people around the table basically showing that this guy, it's really the last person who speaks to him.
Right.
And you could tell him anything. And if you were the last person to say it and with some conviction, he'd just be like, okay. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And terrifying to hear the level of conversation that's happening around this table. It's a fundraising, apparently Jack Nicholson's grandson was there too. They're all talking about golf. It's very weird. Anyways, in a meeting about the aid, Trump wanted to release, Ukraine wanted all the documents. He wanted Mike Pompeo, apparently, according to Bolton, told him that he knew that the allegations against Marie Yovanovitch were false. He believed that Rudy may have been pursuing another agenda when he floated them as a way of getting rid of Yovanovitch, because what's clearly happening is it turns out that Parnas and Fruman knew Trump enough to be sitting in that room before they started working with Rudy Giuliani, which basically is consistent with my theory that you had mobsters trying to get rid of Yovanovitch because they wanted to keep a dirty prosecutor there. And Rudy just was getting paid. Like they're his clients insofar as that, like, they've hired Rudy to orchestrate all this stuff with Trump. It's unbelievable.
This is the guy who RICO'd the city in the early 80s and, imprisoned all the mobsters pretty much in New York.
All the mobsters.
I shouldn't say that. All the Italian mobsters. He's a self-hating Italian.
All the Italian
Left
mobsters.
all the Russians out.
Which opened the door for a lot of Russian mobsters.
Bada bing, bada boom.
I mean, and someone just put up an old Wayne Barrett story on Twitter that showed that charges against Trump just died in Rudy Giuliani's office.
Yes.
But back in the day. But so Pompeo knew that Yovanovitch was being set up. And apparently Bolton told Bill Barr that Bill Barr was mentioned in the July call to Zelensky. Bill Barr has claimed that he only learned about that in August. So Bolton is throwing all these people under the bus.
Barr's so loyal to Trump.
Yes. And according to Bolton, Mick Mulvaney was on at least one call with Rudy Giuliani. So Mick Mulvaney knew what was going on. He gets thrown under the bus. And apparently Bolton, Pompeo, and Mark Esper all told Trump to release the aid almost a dozen times. This is according to Bolton. So this stuff is incredibly damning. And nobody's issued any denials.
This is so crazy. So let's think about how this came about. He must have written this when? Before the impeachment? Or, of course, there's several versions, but...
Well, he was jettisoned like 4 months ago.
Right.
Right? 4 or 5 months ago. The impeachment started 3 months ago, essentially. So he's been writing it for the past 4 months.
So, okay, it
but
is
everybody must have known this
during
story.
the process. But he's basically introducing himself to the impeachment trial.
He's trying. He's been trying. I mean, he announced a week or two ago that he would, if he was subpoenaed by the Senate, he would come and talk. And it is nuts. It's nuts. Now, I should also add, I wouldn't trust John Bolton with anything. I don't think he's lying about this stuff. I just think that his agenda is different from you and I. But use him as a lever to get a Democratic Senate. I'm all in favor of that. That's basically my thinking there. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And we're going to find out in the next couple of days as to whether the Republicans, I mean, I think it's super dangerous for them not to vote to have witnesses. I think they're going to vote to have witnesses. They're going to hide Bolton. They're going to ride that out. And I think they must realize like they're going to lose the Senate. The question is by how much? Right? I mean, it's one thing to lose 3 or 4 seats, or I guess if you lose 3, that's it, right? And 4 seats you got to lose. Mm-hmm. But if they lose 6 or 7, and meanwhile, just to remind everybody, Chris Coons is building the machine in which he's going to sell out all the Democrats. He is working right now on his gang of whatever it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to come out. It's going to be him and somebody else. Mm-hmm. He's going to try and weasel in there and get credit for this witness deal. Mm-hmm. And he's going to start to forge this transpartisan alliance, which is only going to be operable if a Democrat takes the White House, and particularly if the Democrats take the Senate. He is going to be the Joe Lieberman. He's going to put himself right in the middle of the fulcrum of this, and he's going to sell us out. And he's going to do it with, I don't know if he's going to do it with Mark Kelly, or if he's going to do it with Hickenlooper or Manchin or Kristen Sinema. I mean,
that's
the only question is which one of those are going to finally say like, oh, wait a second, maybe I'm progressive again because I'm no longer in the mix of deciding, one of the powerful ones.
Well, it's not going to be Sinema, because Sinema took that turn. I mean, she ran as the most progressive state legislator in Arizona and for Congress, and literally became the most conservative member.
Who knows? Because this is all about, with these senators, it's all about putting themselves in a position where they have as much power in the Senate as they can get.
Right.
And for some of them, and it's also a function of what's happening in their state in terms of Trump. Mm-hmm. So Manchin, I don't think he can move.
Right.
Really. Even if he wanted to. I don't think he wants to. I think he's, I don't know if he's literally a corporate criminal, but one could describe him like that and not be, be in the general ballpark.
Can you imagine if there was a progressive, I mean, I know that Paula Jean Swearingen is run against him, but somebody who had media attention, like a Cynthia Nixon of West Virginia, that could run a progressive that could run against Manchin, because he is not working class, and is the second that's exposed in a massive way in West Virginia, he becomes tremendously vulnerable.
There's a guy named Stephen Smith, I think his name is, who is running a fascinating campaign for the governorship, I think, there in West Virginia. And if he wins, I think that'll be the beginning of the end of the Joe Manchins.
Right.
Because it will create a template. I mean, there's so many things that are up in the air right now that are just nuts. I want to talk about, when we go in the fun half, I want to promise people we're going to talk about the appointments that Tom Perez has made to the DNC, and pick up on this conversation that we keep having to punt because of the enormous amount of...
I don't think I have to convince you anymore. I think it happened.
Well...
I think you got it.
This time around...
Yeah.
This to me looks
this
very,
happened last time, by the way. This happens...
The same...
They do, yes. This happens every single time.